There's a new set of band descriptors that came out this year. The band descriptors, if you don't know, is the rubric by which the IELTS organization, such as it is, will mark your writing tasks, Task 1 and Task 2. And so being familiar with them is extremely important, and keeping up with the changes is important for a teacher. Now, one word that popped in to... Let's have a look what I'm talking about here. These are the band descriptors. Click. Okay, that's at least part of them. And what I noticed was that there's a new word in the band descriptors under task achievement. There in band 7 reads the following rubric. It says, the data are appropriately categorized. Ooh. Now, I've been telling people that for years, that you got to group the headings or the types of data that you're looking at in any way you can, combine them so that you can make broader, bigger comparisons. Right? Right. Categorized. So what does that mean, categorized? Well, it means divided into categories. And I saw this report on the IELTS Tips and Tricks group earlier this week on Facebook. And it's a great example of a graphic just begging for the candidate to actually see the forest through the trees. Can I have a look? We're talking about books. Right? What is the most basic division one can make between the types of books that are sold? Well, I think the 5 that they've got there is a pretty good start, but something simpler. We'll come back to this. But first, I have a couple other examples that are suitable for working with categories or grouping things categorically. Here's a task 1 that must have been in one of the early Cambridge books. I don't remember, but I've certainly seen it regularly for 10 years. 6 pie charts. Now, without looking at what they represent, I'm hoping you should be able to identify 2 of them as being similar to one another and different from the other 4. Now, this test, when it came out in the book, at least, was not in color, so it was even harder to see it. But with the color, hopefully you see the big blue and the big yellow. The big yellows, the ones on the either end of the top row, are similar to one another, whereas the others are all different. Okay, here's the countries that these pie charts represent, and the colors represent the type of land usage. Okay, so Europe and North America fit into one category simply because they have similar data, but for another reason that is you should know out of general knowledge. They're developed nations for the most part, Mexico, but the other 4 regions are at varying degrees of developing. They're still developing nations. Now, if you'd rather not bring economics into it, we could certainly say that the northern and southern regions of the globe, with Central Asia being, you could say, part of the global south. That's a good vocabulary word, the global south. Okay, now note that the word categorizing appears when we're talking about something in particular. Now, I say this because some of you would point to the maxim of never adding information to your analysis of task 1. Only stick to what's on the map. I completely agree with that, except when you're doing so in order to simplify and unify multiple distinctions, thus allowing for a more summarized product. You know, it doesn't say anything in the graphic about North America and Europe being developed nations, but we know that they are, and so it is appropriate to categorize in that way in your overview, just your overview. Okay, so let's look at the context in which this part of the band descriptors is located. It's talking about an overview and presents a clear overview. The data are appropriately categorized and main trends or differences are identified. This was almost the same in the last version, except now that they've added Categorize, we should talk about it. Okay. So, since it's in the overview, this is where you use categorization. Okay, now here's another example of one that's not quite so obvious. Now you can look on the left-hand side, what I'm talking about here, these bar charts. It's not so obvious, but look at these motivations. I go through this a lot in another video, so I'm not going to do it here, but it's about motivations, and it is a generally accepted fact in the field of psychology that we can divide people's motives into two categories: intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. And that's what I was able to do here. So let's come back to this report made earlier. Okay, it's a great example, begging the candidate to actually see the forest through the trees. Have a look now. I'm talking about books. Already I did that part. So, the pie charts, if you look at them this way, with orange representing fiction and blue representing the other half, represent non-fiction, fiction and non-fiction. Couldn't get more bipolar than that. You'll see, oh, look at that, in 72, non-fiction made up more than half, then it fell to about half, and now it's just over a quarter. So yes, there is an obvious trend here, but it might not be so obvious if you're looking at it with all those colors in it. Here's what our candidate wrote.
The pie charts present a breakdown of 5 types of books which were sold by one particular seller in 3 distinct years: 1972, 1992, 2012. Overall, it is readily apparent that the most noticeable increase was observed in the sales of adult fiction books, while it was biography books that had experienced a significant decline by the final year.
Figures a highest and lowest analysis. Just go with the highest and go with the lowest. That's not the best way to do it. Now, in your overview, in your first one, a breakdown. What's a breakdown? You don't even mention anywhere here that they are proportions. This, overall, it is readily apparent that is a canned phrase. You're going to put that at the beginning of every overview, and in the new band descriptors, it does say that the use of obviously canned phrases will not be rewarded. Biographies, that's what they're called, not biography books. That's
the pie charts present a breakdown of 5 types of...
Here we go. Okay, continuing.
Focusing on the growth areas initially, we can see that adult books, which stood at 20% in the initial year, surged by 25% to 45% in 2012. This was closely followed by children's fiction books, which accounted for 20% in 1972, after which the figure had risen by 2% by 1992. Next, the trend for this book category made up a quarter of the whole sales of books in 2012.
Next, the trend... Okay, let's start again. Focusing on the growth areas initially... Huh? Okay, you mean like initially in the paragraph. Okay, fine. We can see that... Why am I reading it again? Adult books. No, they're not adult books. They're books. Adult books sounds like got naked people in it. Surged by 25% to 45%. Now be careful with this. What is 25% of 20%? 25% of 20% is 5%. So if it surged by 25%, it went up to 25. Follow me? That's what it looks like it's saying. This was closely followed, not really, 20 to 25, that's a close follow? No, they're not close at all. Risen by 2%. That is the definition of not being significant. Anything that changes by 2%, you should not report it because it's not a main feature. Next, the trend for this book category. What book? Oh, you're still talking about children's fiction books. Okay. Books, 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 books. Lots of books in here. Yeah, that does not identify, or it does not adequately identify the main features, nor is it accurate.
Focusing on the growth areas
Wait,
initially.
next. Oh, here we go.
Unlike these forms of books,
Unlike
biography
these,
and travel books underwent a marginal drop over the period studied.
Books.
In the case of the former, the figure constituted 1 in 5 in 1972, thereafter which it declined 15% after 2 decades and 8% at the end of the period. The latter one, meanwhile, saw an increase of 3% from 15% in 1972 to 18% in 1992, but by the final year there had been a 10% decrease to 8% in the sales of biography books. Regarding the others category, there was a dip of 13% to 12% in 2012, which meant that it made up more than biography and travel books in this year.
All right. Unlike these forms of books, I like that you're trying to connect it to the previous paragraph, but usually pronouns are referencing like this is reset at the paragraph. Okay, all right, marginal, semicolon, why? Thereafter, which it declined 15% after 2 decades and 8% at the end of the period. What? Alright, I have to really look at this now. The former, which is what? Biography. Okay. So biography went from 20 to 15 to 8. Oh, okay. So it declined to 15%. It didn't decline 15%. It declined 5%, or, well, in this case, actually, it declined 25% from 20 to 15. And 8% of the end of the period. At no point do we really understand that this is a percentage of the total books sold. The latter one, which, Oh, you mean travel books. Meanwhile, so this is completely unneeded and unnecessary detail. Others is definitely, by definition, others are not main features. They are others. They are not main. Main is the opposite of other. And a pretty weak attempt to try to make a comparison. It's not a comparison about a relevant. It's not a comparison of the main features. It's a comparison of a detail, which doesn't count as a comparison as they want to see. Okay, so rough.
Unlike these four.
Right. Okay, but it didn't help someone from saying, "Oh, look at this." The essay addressed the task by describing the changes in the book sales over the years. That is true, it did do that, but that is not addressing the task. What is addressing the task? It's in the band descriptors all the time. The task isn't describe everything, and that's what you've done. You've described everything. What is the requirements of the task? It says it in the instructions. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Those are the requirements of the task, not describe the change in sales. That's not it. And if it sounded like you were saying book quite a bit, because you were, 10 times you said book. 245 words, why did I even do this? I don't generally review any task ones over 220 words. One sentence was 36 words long. Yeesh. Would have taken you 19 minutes and 9 seconds to write that. That's the whole 20 minutes right there without even any analyzing or checking. Well, I decided I would finish here with an example of the introduction and the overview that I wrote. Okay, there are 3 pie charts which illustrate housing. I don't know how they got it. I did it as voice recognition, so that doesn't belong there. That illustrates how the proportion of different genre of books sold at a particular shop changed over a period of 40 years. Overall, it can be seen that fiction titles went from being less than half of sales to become the majority of what the shop sold. I have combined children and adult fiction into one category. Although children's fiction grew marginally as compared to nonfiction, the main driver of this overall shift came from the stronger sales of literature aimed at adults. Note, titles, literature. These are synonyms for books. Okay, that's it, folks. I haven't done one of these in a long time. This took a long time to do. Hope you enjoyed it and learned something. Pause it. Oh, and there goes the electricity. Great. Will this one work? Oh no, because the speakers aren't working. Yeah.